My name is Dell Deaton, and I'm author-creator of the JamesBondWatches.com website and blog. Following is part 3 of 6 of my presentation on James Bond watches to the 64th Annual Convention of the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors. This was held in Grand Rapids, Michigan, June 13th, 2009. The next topic that I'd like to discuss is the serendipitous effect of studying James Bond watches, the things that you learn en route to learning other things. I've titled this slide The Pinball Effect after a fellow by the name of James Burke, who had a very entertaining way of looking at history as a cause and effect, and looking for one thing found another thing, and that led to all sorts of other things that he might not have even been looking at in the first place. The reason that I've adopted this term as it relates to James Bond watches is that if we weren't looking at James Bond watches and following that thread, we might have missed the idea that a technology of the 1950s and 1960s called NAWCC tubes, back before solid-state components were used to create the numbers on the nuclear device clock that counts down at the climax of that movie. Those were NAWCC tubes. We might also miss out on the fact that Matthew Damon, who plays Jason Bourne, who I will refer to kindly as a James Bond alternative, new to the scene, in his personal life he's known to wear a Rolex Explorer reference 1016. And of course the Rolex Explorer 1016 is the first James Bond watch, the original literary James Bond watch. Another thing that I found quite interesting as I was crossing technology and timelines related to James Bond watches is the topic of radioactivity. This is an article that appeared in Watch Time. This is, as far as I know, the first real identification that I saw published that I've seen published anywhere that identifies independently the Dr. No, Goldfinger, Thunderball, James Bond Rolex Submariners. You can see here that the author has narrowed it down to 5 possible alternatives. He talks about the crown, he talks about the rotating bezel, he talks about crystal types, and then for our purposes here and kind of radiating off of the topic that I had before, he talks about the radium indices, which a lot of people who talk about these early James Bond watches, whether they've picked up this article or maybe they picked it up from someplace else, really miss that as an identifying factor. The other thing that I like about this is that Mr. Sprague is from Petoskey, Michigan, which is where I come from, and also the host area of the NAWCC conference this year in Grand Rapids. And again, the attribute to this is Watch Time magazine, October 2004. So Watch Time very much in the lead of James Bond watch identification, whether it's my own article from February of 2009, which is the first to solve the mystery, as they say, of the literary James Bond watch, or in this case, October of 2004, solving the mystery of the movie Bond watches, the early Rolex Submariners. I did some research in regard to preparatory work on my own article. I met with the chemistry department at the University of Michigan, and also some people with the who study nuclear items, and we had a discussion of how it is that radium-226, which is the dial of these watches, has a 1600-year half-life. On the left is the decay sequence there. What's interesting about this, not just as a point of history as it relates to watches in general, horology, but also the fact that the Rolex Explorer, which was Fleming's own watch and his basis for the watch that featured in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and the Sean Connery Goldfinger Rolex, both featured radium dials. We also, as a secondary point here, I note that the Geiger counter, which is checked by waving the wand over the watch that Sean Connery is wearing in Dr. No, parallels a description, also to check a Geiger counter, that Ian Fleming wrote in his Thunderball novel, which was published a year earlier. And then finally, I've put on here the bottom note there, radium girls. These were women who painted the dials of watches, and unfortunately, because nobody really knew the full extent of the deleterious effects, they would oftentimes paint their teeth and use the paint as makeup. subjecting themselves to all sorts of ills, as you can imagine, and ultimately changing labor history in the sense that radium is no longer used on watch dials. Again, I highlight the University of Michigan here as the Michigan angle for the NAWCC conference this year, and also it's my alma mater. Another serendipitous item here is the Boy Scouts of America. Ian Fleming, in his own right, was a renowned collector of first editions. He focused on nonfiction, technical books, the best in their areas, as he was acquiring these. The books that you see here on the left is the only known complete copy of Scouting for Boys by Lord Robert Baden-Powell, the father of the Boy Scout movement worldwide and the Boy Scouts of America, which, by the way, will turn 100 years old this coming February 2010. These again are housed at the Lilly Library on the campus of Indiana University at Bloomington, along with the Ian Fleming manuscripts and other correspondence that I've mentioned earlier. I took this photograph myself when I was there, May 28, 2008, in relation to a number of things that were going on that I was a part of for the Ian Fleming Center. This final slide in the sequence that we're on here is reference to Roger Moore's favorite gadget of his tenure as James Bond, and it happens to be a watch. The watch on the left here is the modified version for the sheer magnetism watch, as we refer to it. It's a Rolex Submariner, specially modified. It was sold several years ago at a Christie's auction, so we know exactly what reference it is. It's a 5513, believed to have been manufactured in 1972. The case number is provided. Christie's sold this in 1998 for $36,795. I doubt that we would be able to replicate that, but this is kind of not just a point of trivia in terms of information that we had, but also all of the pieces that come together in an interesting fashion as you're doing research. Following the Christie's auction leads to the identification of the watch, where this information is specifically known. We have valuation here. We look at the memoir or the autobiography of Sir Roger Moore as a way of telling us that he has a vested interest in this bit of James Bond history. And with that, we're going to conclude part 3. Please continue now to part 4.